It was a dramatic primary night across Texas, and several big races are far from over. So what do these results tell us about where Republican and Democratic voters are right now? Are we in an anti-incumbent mood, or is something bigger happening? Joining us now to discuss is HPM reporter Michael Adkison. And if you have comments or questions on last night's results, you can give us a call, 713-440-8870.
Michael, what surprised you most about last night?
Oh, what surprised me most? That's a good question. I think that there were a couple of big names that are not moving forward, shall we say. Dan Crenshaw being one of them. That's a big one. I mean, you just think about where Dan Crenshaw was, 10 years ago, or several years ago, and the role that he played in the Republican Party to now is kind of remarkable. I'll tell you the truth. I'm a little bit surprised by the Jasmine Crockett James Talarico race and the result that James Talarico is
seemed like a flip of the coin when we were going into it.
It really did, and I think that it's really telling how people talked about this race last fall and Talarico's prospects in the race to now here we are, and Jasmine Crockett is not the victor that people thought she was going to be, essentially.
And I think when we look at that race specifically, a lot of conversation that I'm hearing is it really came down to the Valley, South Texas, that Latino vote, that James Talarico was able to make traction in South Texas more than essentially Crockett was able to do that. And so it's very interesting to see.
Yeah, she kind of won the big cities, didn't she? She won Houston.
She won Houston, yeah.
And Dallas.
It's interesting because polling on it went back and forth. And so 2 weeks ago, she was way up. Then a week ago, he was way up.
It was like 9 points. He was up.
And you're like, what's going on here? The sway back and forth. And of course, it illustrates just how significant media culture is in our elections. And it sounds dumb, and we've known this since the Nixon era, but a thing like The Late Show shifted his tides. The blogger experience that happened supposedly with something Talarico had said shifted the tides the other way, and that these media impacts, when they fell, really had an impact. Had they been flipped, this race might have been flipped.
Right, and I think we can do a lot of, Monday morning as an analysis, essentially, on what happened here. But at the risk of speaking too much about this race on the grander picture of nationwide races, I think it really is telling of what kind of candidate Democrats are appealing to at this moment, where, they just got butchered in 2024. And who won this race when you had a candidate that was let's work together, let's find harmony, and a candidate who was brash and unafraid to speak her mind. And Democrats, it was very close, obviously, but Democrats ultimately went with the one who said, let's work on bipartisanship, let's work together and figure out a way to move forward. I think that's, what a lot of Democrats are going to be looking for come November.
Well, sorry.
But, Michael, here in Houston, voters in the 18th Congressional District may be bracing for yet another trip to the polls.
Another one.
Congressmen Al Green and Christian Menefee appear to be headed toward a Democratic runoff in May, which would mean, again, a fourth election in about 7 months for that district alone. Talk to us about that. That was some of the coverage that you were specifically doing.
Right, and I'm actually working on something following up on that, again, 4 elections in 7 months, coming off of 2 years of just, tumultuous patterns in that district. You've got Sheila Jackson Lee running for that district after losing her mayoral election and then dying suddenly, and then Sylvester Turner then being the nominee, and then he died suddenly and unexpectedly. And then it was 11 months without representation, and then it was a special election, a runoff, a primary, and a runoff. And then there will have to be a November election for this district, all happening in the span of about 2.5 to 3 years. It's just, I spoke with voters yesterday, and they're like, we are tired of having to go to the polls.
The district shifted in the middle of it all, too.
Exactly. There was redistricting.
So that threw everything off. I'm curious your thoughts on Amanda Edwards, because even though she stepped out of the race, she couldn't step out, I don't believe, any sooner, because she didn't know how her race was going to go when she was running. But that was almost 8% of the vote went to her, and she is not even in the race. But her name was on the ballot, and people still voted for her. Had she not been there, we very well may have seen a different outcome.
Right, and you caught me at the wrong moment. I had earlier looked up the sheer number of votes, not the percentage, but
7,318.
Well, so it's 7,000, right?
Right.
That's just about how many people voted almost entirely in those previous elections, that because this was a primary, that there was just such higher turnout than in the special elections.
Yeah.
So it really is kind of remarkable to think about it in that sense, that that was thousands. This primary had way more voters than the special elections previously. And so those 7,000 who voted for Amanda Edwards, probably not all 7,000 are going to go back to the runoff election, but exactly how many of them do and who they go to, I think, could play a major role in this.
Just for point of reference, Menefee got 43,595 and Al Green got 41,818 to Edwards and 7,318.
All right. If you'd like to join the conversation, 713-440-8870. We have Colby on the line from Katy. Colby, welcome to Hello Houston.
Howdy, y'all.
Hi.
Hi. I have a comment. I think one of the big shakeups in the demo sphere, I'm a Democrat, was the last item on the ballot, or last position on the ballot, was our county party chair. Tracy Gibson has ousted Mike Doyle.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That come as a surprise to you, Colby?
A little bit. I think, Mike Doyle has some very loyal supporters, and Tracy Gibson is relatively new to Harris County politics, but, I guess a little shakeup was needed, and I look forward to seeing what she can bring to the table.
Yeah.
Colby, thank you very much for those comments, and we'll continue to watch these races as we move forward. Another race that surprised me, I don't know if you've been following this one or not, but the lieutenant governor race that Goodwin just missed by 2% getting out of having to have a runoff, but there's going to be a runoff there too. Surprised?
Yes and no. That's a good question. Obviously, this race come November is going to be Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's to lose, essentially. Democrats certainly have an uphill battle here. I think it's a race I hate to say that the Senate race, understandably, has gotten a lot of the attention, but that the governor's race, the lieutenant governor's race, really have not gotten as much attention as you would expect or anticipate any other year, election cycles. I mean, think about 2022 when it was Beto O'Rourke running ultimately against Greg Abbott. That got so much attention because that was basically the biggest race in Texas that year for the most part. Those two races, lieutenant governor and governor, I don't think have gotten as much attention. So we'll see. The Democratic primary, I think it will be interesting to see where that goes from here and what the narrative goes like. But, Vicki Goodwin, as well as the Democratic nominee for Governor Gina Hinojosa and now the Senate Democratic nominee, James Talarico, all colleagues in the Texas State House of Representatives. So, how they differ from one another will be really interesting.
I wonder if there's some strategy there from the Democrats saying, you know what, let's just try to flip one seat at a time. Let's go with the James Talarico or Jasmine Crockett, two strong candidates. Let's try to get them in there and get that seat won, and then we'll worry about governor or lieutenant governor.
Well, there's already talk of Crockett for Ted Cruz's seat to put her up to go against him.
Don't you, is there a one election at a time to try to take over as opposed to let's just go full blast blue everywhere we look?
And that's a good question. And obviously the U.S. Senate seat, I think most everyone would agree, is probably the biggest seat that's up for grabs in this election cycle. And, I feel like every November when there's an election, we're talking about Texas is going to turn blue this year. And who's to say if that actually is going to hold true? But I do see your point that this is obviously the most major race. And that's where a lot of Democrats are going to shift their attention. And I think come November, again, nationwide, you are going to see so much money poured into this race, specifically from Democrats and James Talarico.
But I do think that Gina Hinojosa is somebody to watch. She is a Latina from South Texas. She's from Brownsville. I have been watching her rise, I would say, to this position. Her candidacy. She is well liked in Austin. I also think that it's going to be a tough road to beat Governor Abbott, and if she does not, he will be the longest sitting governor, I believe, that we've had in Texas history.
Yes.
And if she did beat him, then she would be breaking that 30-year plus track. Do you think that this is a telling time? I keep asking, are we in a moment?
I think I go back and forth. I think that I saw someone shared this on social media last night, and I think they really hit it on the nose of what it would take for a Democrat to actually flip a seat in Texas. It has to be a great Democratic candidate. it has to be, as Democrats would see it, a poor Republican candidate. And there's also just got to be that momentum on the national level. And so I think that's why they've got their eyes on this November, particularly if Ken Paxton is the victor in the Republican runoff for the state or for the U.S. Senate seat. That will really put Democrats in what they would see as the best position.
I think, though, that the fact we always miss, we always look back to 2018, say there'll be a blue wave, there'll be a blue wave. But that's because you could do a straight party ticket. So if in like a case people came out for James Talarico, was it 8 years ago, they could have just hit Democrat and then all the Democratic candidates would have ridden on this coattail. But because they changed that and took that off the ballots, now you can't do it. So you have to work through every race. And I think that is going to stall from a sweep of any time. You can say maybe more Democrats will come out, but a lot of people will vote for the couple races they came for and leave the rest of the ballot empty. So I think that's what makes the challenge harder to have a blue wave in a state like Texas.
Certainly. And I kind of had a tongue-in-cheek comment there about how we always hear about a blue wave in Texas. Yeah. But at the end of the day, there is a Democratic base here in the state that, there is a significant proportion. We're not all Republican in Texas. But that being said, voting has shown that we are more Republican than we are Democrat. And so, it is going to be an uphill battle for these candidates. I will also add, I mentioned earlier that they're all state house colleagues, Hinojosa, Talarico, and Goodwin. They're also Central Texas representatives. Each one of them is from the Austin, Williamson County, Travis County area, which also makes this really interesting, too. They all were very close with one another.
And just to reiterate how hard it would be essentially for somebody to come in and beat Governor Abbott basically has everything that a candidate could dream of in his position. He has more than $100 million in campaign cash on hand, strong name recognition, and he has the backing of the current president. That's something we've been looking at, endorsements. And we saw Governor Abbott kind of fracture a little bit with the president when it came to endorsements. Was there anything surprising there for you?
About the result for Governor Abbott?
Yeah.
Not particularly. I used to work in Austin covering politics. I've met his biggest supporters, and Abbott is someone that his supporters truly see as just, where the party should be, essentially. He is very smart. He's very cordial. He's very qualified. Governor Abbott used to be a Supreme Court justice and then the Attorney General, and now he's the governor. That he has quite the resume, and it shows in the way that he handles his politics and his policy priorities. And so, I'm not surprised, to say the least. He is someone who's very cordial and intelligent and can voice his thoughts even if they're in disagreement with the president and still come out the victor. And obviously that has shown.
Well, there was a lot of talk about maybe his desire to be president. Is that sort of quelled?
That when I moved to Austin, when I moved back to Texas, that was the conversation. Was Governor Abbott wants to be president, and what's the path that's going to get him there? And that really has not come to fruition in the way I think a lot of people think it has. He has made very clear in the past, I'm in Texas. My focus is Texas. We'll see what's down the road, but my focus is Texas. That, 2024, when President Trump was floating Governor Abbott's name as a potential vice presidential candidate, pretty quickly, Governor Abbott said, respectfully, no, thank you. I would like to stay in Texas. He did not see himself at the vice presidency.
To go back to Celeste's question, though, and I'm curious if anyone has tallied that. I'm sure someone has. I don't know it yet. But as we talk about endorsements, and Abbott did split with Trump on a few endorsements.
Sure.
Do we know, is there the tally list? Who won that?
So
Whose endorsements?
The biggest one that comes to mind is the I can't remember exactly what district it was. I believe it was 8th or 9th, but the race that was Briscoe Cain versus Alex Mueller.
Right.
That's probably the most. There's a couple notable ones. That's a very notable one in the sense that Briscoe Cain, tried and true Republican, well known in Texas, and Governor Abbott endorsed him for his work in the State House of Representatives, and Donald Trump endorsed Alex Mueller. Now, there has been quite a bit of analysis on that of did President Trump just want to endorse who was leading in the polls so he didn't look like he endorsed the wrong person? That's potentially a factor. The other major race being the agricultural commissioner, and that's kind of a dramatic one.
That was also, I think, a big dramatic one.
It definitely was.
Because I interviewed both Nate Sheets as well as former now agriculture commissioner Sid Miller. And, I would say Nate Sheets was very proud at the fact that the governor had endorsed him. And at the time, Sid Miller had not been endorsed by President Trump, but later on he was endorsed by him. And I think that says a lot in regards to Republicans looking to leadership within our state.
Certainly.
And just for point of reference, Sheets got 53% of the vote. Miller got 47% of the vote.
There you go. I think that Miller, he was someone who had very closely aligned himself with Donald Trump. That
Yes.
He was someone who was very vocal about his support. I remember covering a couple of events that Donald Trump was at, both when he. Well, I guess they were both when he was a candidate for the 2024 election, and Agricultural Commissioner Sid Miller was there. He was and made known that he was there. So I think it's pretty telling. I think, one wonders what went on leading up to Governor Abbott's non-endorsement of Miller, what led up to that. And I think one factor may potentially have just been that Miller, at the very beginning of the conversation about a THC ban, Miller was opposed because he said this is going to hurt farmers. And, when you're looking for what led up to this, that's potentially a factor.
Yeah, and I also think it's a factor in the fact that when President Trump originally first came into office, he, as well as Governor Abbott, really cracked down on the immigration policies. And Sid Miller came out and was very public to the governor and said, hey, we have trucks sitting on the border, U.S. trucks sitting on the border with produce that's going bad. And this is costing farmers tens of millions of dollars. You've got to do something about this. So Sid Miller, from a record standpoint, looking at policy and agriculture, has been outspoken, and he will call out the governor. So it'll be very interesting to see the relationship between Nate Sheets and the governor and how that works out with representing Texas agriculture.
Certainly. I also I'm laughing to myself as we're talking about this, and I feel like sometimes when we talk about politics and what leads up to these decisions, it's almost like the same energy as like what led up to a big fight on Real Housewives. It's like you look for every little clue to be like, where did the daylight go wrong between them? What led up to this?
Dun, dun. I love it.
One last race we haven't really talked much about is the Attorney General in Mays Middleton versus Chip Roy, which is really going to be an interesting race to watch up close. Mays Middleton had almost 40% to Chip Roy's about 31% in the early voting, or the whatever we want to call primary vote. So it's going to be an interesting race to see who takes the lead there.
Definitely. And I will also add that, we're only having this race essentially because Ken Paxton is the candidate for Senate in the Republican primary now, the runoff. And so his sort of protege, if you will, was Aaron Wright, who was not successful in the race. So it's going to be, I think, really interesting to see if Attorney General Paxton weighs in on this race now that it is going towards this runoff between Middleton and Chip Roy. He obviously has been very critical of Chip Roy in the past for the ways that Chip Roy has broken with the president. And so it's hard to see him weighing in support of Chip Roy, but we'll see if he goes as far as to weigh in support of Mays Middleton, or if he just says, hey, I've got a primary runoff of my own to focus on, and that's where my attention's going to go.
Well, what about Wesley Hunt? Do you think he'll make an endorsement?
That's a good question. If you're Wesley Hunt, I think you've got a lot of questions before you about what's next. Do you make an endorsement in the runoff?
And if you're wrong,
what do you do?
Yeah.
What does your future look like? Wesley Hunt has got a lot of questions before him, I think, about next steps.
And he was
Edwards,
arguing, I just want to go to Hunt for a moment. He was arguing, he saw a path forward. He wasn't a spoiler. He could have done something. Numbers are not supporting that belief.
Right. And, again, one wonders what the race would have looked like had Wesley Hunt not done that.
Yeah.
Would we be going to a runoff? Would there have been a clear victor on Tuesday night? Who's to say? But, now we'll find out come May.
Yeah.
Houston public media reporter Michael Adkison, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thank y'all.